I'm Nora Duncan, State Director for AARP Connecticut, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP CT, an interview series on the issues important to people 50 plus in Connecticut and their families. We have wrapped up the 2026 legislative session, and I am here with John Erlingheuser and Natalie Shurtleff, who lead our advocacy efforts with the help of our volunteers, of course, at the state legislature. Even numbered years means it's a shorter legislative session. And this year we ran February to May, and next year we'll run January to June. But February to May really crams in a lot of things into a short period of time. And we have covered some of those items in our pre-session preview and our mid-session check-in episodes of this series. And like those, I'm just going to go back and forth with some questions for Natalie and John. And I am going to welcome Natalie first to say a few words about support for family caregivers. It's been a huge priority for us at AARP for years. Over 700,000 caregivers in Connecticut got a big win this session. So can you tell us about it, Natalie?
Yeah, definitely. And, you shared that it was a short session, but I think we had a pretty long list of accomplishments for a short session. And kind of topping that off is support for family caregivers. We've talked before on this about the caregiver tax credit, and we were successful in getting that included in the budget. So that was a really, really huge win that will ensure that family caregivers get the support that they need. So there'll be a little bit of time before it goes into effect, but starting in 2027, family caregivers that meet income thresholds will qualify for a caregiver tax credit of up to $2,000 to offset typical caregiving expenses. So these are things like home modifications and hiring respite care and all of the things that family caregivers we know are already spending a lot of money out of pocket. And so this is going to give them a little bit of financial relief to offset those costs.
Yeah, and we're super excited about this. Now, it goes into effect in the 2027 tax year. So, starting January 1, 2027, you'll be hearing a lot from us about making sure you're saving your receipts and what the process will be to engage for your caregiver tax credit. And, we've seen other states do this. We followed along the lines of Oklahoma, actually, and they just made changes to their tax credit. So we're going to roll this out, see how it goes. And, we may be back at it again for a little more for family caregivers. But congratulations to you on getting that over the hump for us this year. So, John, we never stop talking about electric rates, do we? So what we did not know a few months ago was how successful utility companies would be at the Public Utility Regulatory Authority. We learned recently of a drop in the rates that I believe June 1, you have to tell me. But consumers feel the pain of utility rates. And did any bills this year pass or fail that impact ratepayers?
So let me start off since you're talking about rates. Rates will be going down significantly this month, actually in May, approximately on average $30 a household based on the rate adjustment mechanism because UI and Eversource were getting more money than they actually were entitled to get. So that is going to be reflected in the rate. So that's some good news. Some other good news is we were successful in mitigating some of the things or preventing some of the things that the legislature wanted to do. So as an example, we were able to defeat this what they call municipal aggregation, which would require mandate that individuals switch supplier en masse based on where they live and to a third party electric supplier, which would have increased everybody's rates. And considering that 70% or more of residential customers are on standard service, that would not have been good news for ratepayers. It's billed as something that would help ratepayers, but it actually would be harmful. And we're one of the pro-consumer organizations that have been fighting that. We were also successful. They did pass a big piece of legislation, one of the only utility pieces of legislation to pass this year that dealt with solar and the solar programs that currently help people pay for the incentives, includes the incentives that help people pay for solar installation, either leasing or buying or certain programs like that. But what we were successful in doing is working with the commissioner of the Department of Energy and Economic Development and mitigating that so that there were actually caps in there, because the cost of those programs are reflected in the public benefits charge. And that's one of the drivers of that charge, not the sole driver. But people will notice in their bills of late, the public benefits charge has actually dropped because the factors that were driving that cost have subsided. So, everybody got all excited about it, and rightfully so, because we do pay the highest electric rates in the country, but that is now going down as well. I wish we could say that we've had some luck at the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority of late, but the new commission seems to be less consumer friendly than the previous commission. But we're going to put them to the test, because in June, there's going to be a big rate case for those that live in the Eversource electric territory, which is 80% of residential customers. And we're going to do everything we can to fight that rate case to make sure that ratepayers are getting the fair end of the stick here when it comes to paying what is only just and equitable, and not a penny more than the utility deserves for rates. So a lot happening. But I think overall we were successful in at least preventing more bad things and mitigating the things, because solar has benefit. There's no question about it. In the long run, will pay dividends. But, we were successful in at least mitigating the costs right in real time to ratepayers. So a lot happening. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, I wish I was as excited about your report out on utility rates as I am about Natalie's caregiver tax credit, but
yeah,
we live to fight another day, don't we?
Sure.
Okay, John. Also disappointing. We often hear about Connecticut having Social Security income taxes. It's partially true, but this year we thought we might see movement on the issue. So tell us what happened.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right, Nora. For a lot of people, particularly those in the lower income levels or the moderate income levels, currently don't pay tax on retirement income, and specifically Social Security. But when you get into that $100,000 for individuals and $125,000 for married couples in total retirement income, Social Security is still taxable. And so we were hopeful this year. I know the majority in the Senate Democrats had in their original consumer legislation the relinquishing of all taxation on Social Security for the rest of forever. But unfortunately, because it was so costly, it was something like $55 million in lost revenue a year. It wasn't something that made it over the finish line. We were hopeful. We worked very hard to try to achieve that, because, again, what we do know about retirees is that they actually contribute more to the gross state product than they take out, which is counterintuitive. People think of retirees as those that are receiving benefits and not contributing, but in fact, they contribute more than they take out of the economy. So we want to do all that we can so that people, when they retire here in the state of Connecticut and don't go to South Carolina and don't go to Florida. And frankly, what's ironic is when people do retire to those other places, they all come back here for medical reasons and all the others, because Connecticut does have such a high quality of life, but it is a costly state to live in. So we want to encourage those folks to not leave Connecticut and then come back here only when they need services. We want them to stay here and continue to contribute. So we didn't make it this year, but the fact that it was raised as a major issue puts it back on the radar screen, and it's something we're going to continue to fight to make happen, because it is, very important and beneficial to all residents of Connecticut to have that happen. So we'll keep fighting the good fight.
And I know it's important to a lot of our members, and we don't want people who can afford to leave, because you're right, they are contributing quite a bit to our economy. So my advice for our viewers who care about this is, it's an election season coming up. Why don't you ask about that to your candidates and see if they can support this moving forward. It is costly, but so is losing our residents, and it's an issue. So, all right, we'll try again next year, John. All right, Natalie, did any bills that we were working on impact long-term services and supports, for individuals, maybe nursing homes needing home care, et cetera. What happened in that section of our work?
So there was one bill that addresses homemaker companions. So these are individuals that come into your home to provide non-medical services, but things like helping with the laundry, meal preparation, companionship for individuals that need a little extra care. But currently, there was no requirements for training for these individuals. So we passed a bill. It almost didn't make it across the finish line at the end. So we had a last push the last few days, did end up making it across the finish line at about 3 a.m. on the last day of session. And that bill will ensure that homemaker companions are getting some training, including training on Alzheimer's and dementia for those that are caring for individuals with those diseases. So really big win there to make sure that those caregivers have the appropriate training to support the people they're caring for.
Great. I know there was some other stuff that happened too, little things here and there that our good friend Mairead Painter at the long-term care ombudsman was happy about. And so we'll keep looking into that and seeing what we can do to continue to make homemaker companions and home care and nursing homes better, more accessible, etc. All right, John, back to you. Fraud prevention is something that AARP is active on all the time. And our volunteers are super active in the community and helping to bring fraud prevention information to the masses. But we were in front of the legislature on some items, crypto, gift card scams, and I think even maybe some solar bad consumer behavior. Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about some of that stuff? I think we have some wins and some losses.
Yeah. So absolutely. Let me start where we didn't really cross the finish line on one, which was that we were trying to ensure that people who were involved in investment fraud through cryptocurrency or wire transfer type fraud, really fraud. We're not talking about people who go in and just make a bad investment, but people who are actually scammed in an investment setting with cryptocurrency. We were hoping to get them to be able to deduct up to $75,000 of that loss from their income tax. Now, that's not a credit like the very valuable caregiver tax credit that eligible people will be able to get up to $2,000. We're talking about a deduction. So basically deducting from their income their losses in a scam. I think a lot of people didn't realize that we were talking about a scam as opposed to somebody just making a bad investment. We all make bad investments sometimes in our life. But unfortunately, because of the cost to it and the lack of knowledge about what we were actually trying to accomplish, we weren't able to make that over the finish line. It was a project of House Majority Leader Jason Rojas, and we were thankful for him because we were able to finally really start talking and creating a dialogue about the losses that are incurred by those that are victims of fraud. So we're gonna revisit that and other forms of compensation for fraud victims. But we did have a really strong pro-consumer session. We worked very closely with retailers and law enforcement on passing legislation to deal with organized retail theft, specifically around gift cards. We're not talking about the gift card scam where somebody calls you up and says, I have your son in jail and you have to go get me a $500 gift card and send me the code because otherwise I won't be able to get them out of jail. People really are somewhat familiar with that, but this is where actually organized gangs are going in and taking gift cards off shelves in stores, and they're draining, they're getting the IDs to them, and so that and repackaging them and putting them back in the store so that when the gift cards are activated when you buy it, ultimately you're buying something that's having immediately the value of it drained. And I know people have experienced this. And so we worked closely to ensure that this area where there are something like $12 million in scams, according to the FTC in 2024, that people are losing. So we work to ensure that we increase the penalties on this, gave law enforcement better tools to be able to deal with this organized crime, and really bring our state statutes up into a level where this exists with other crimes. Because again, it's very new. We know when it comes to fraud, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Every time we put up some barriers to fraud, the criminals figure out ways around them. And so along with that, though, we also worked with the chairs of the banking committee to create a working group and a task force to actually examine fraud in general and various types of fraud and come up with solutions for that fraud. And that task force will include people from the banking industry, the retail industry, law enforcement, advocacy groups like AARP, legislators involved in this type of legislation, to really just kind of come up with what are the problems, what are we hearing, what's out there, and what kind of solutions can we get. And then finally with solar, we're trying to bring consumer protections for solar sales in line with those of the third-party electric market. We have the biggest consumer protections of any state in the nation when it comes to sales of third-party electric suppliers, which is why people actually, think about going into the market again, and actually, if they do, are saving money, because we really put barriers and bumpers around all the bad habits. When it comes to solar, it's kind of like wild, wild west still. And, solar is a good product. We're not discouraging solar. We're not slamming solar. It's an investment. Unlike the third-party electric supply market, you're talking about a $25,000 or more investment. So that, there really should be some standards in terms of how they present what solar is, what the facts are, how agents of solar companies act when they come to your door or call you on the phone or solicit you in the mail. So, there are some protections that are built into the law, but also some mandates that the solar working group task force will have, to come up with some additional protections that we think are needed, to create a handbook for individuals to have when they get solar, so that they can see what they need to know before they sign a contract. By the way, they have 3 days to cancel a contract. So, if you sign on the dotted line when somebody comes to your door, you've got protection. So big industry. It's something, I often tell solar companies that, we want to protect them from themselves. We want people to feel comfortable when they get involved in solar. We're not trying to slam solar. So we had a pretty good year when it comes to consumers this year.
Good. And hopefully our friends at the Department of Consumer Protection will not get as many calls as they get now about solar. One of their biggest calls they get.
Yeah.
So,
and then that's the interesting thing, because, solar, it's weird. It's unlike the third-party electric suppliers. You're contracting for a service. So, somebody's installing something on you. So It involves the Consumer Protection Department. It involves, the Department of Energy. It crosses a lot of lines, which makes policing it so much more complicated, because you're not buying a product, you're having an installation. So there are areas around installation that are important, as well as the product itself. So
and there's also just things that are not even that are the solar industry is even doing wrong, but that people just don't understand when they sign up. Are you leasing those panels? Are you owning those panels? Like what, things like that. So this a forward-looking, examination of both what we can do for consumer protections, but just educating people on a product is good for consumers. So good work on that. All right, Natalie. Affordable housing and transportation is a problem for lots of people in our state. We hear about it all the time. Did you see any success with those livability issues?
Yeah, we saw some big success with transportation. So we saw a bill that will improve and extend a existing pilot program on what's called microtransit. So microtransit is a kind of smaller scale type of public transit, more similar to like an Uber service, where you can schedule a ride from like 2 points when there isn't existing bus or rail or other public transportation service. And it can be really great for seniors. I heard from some of our volunteers that utilize the service that are frequent users of public transportation, but sometimes there's just not a bus service or a train service to get you where you want to go. Or maybe you can take the bus somewhere, but that walk from the bus stop to your final destination is just a little bit too far. This service can help close that gap so you can take the bus to the bus stop and then get a connection service to your final destination so that you can walk. And so so that you can get there using public transportation and not needing to drive. We also saw increased funding for Shoreline East. We did a great trip last year on Shoreline East, taking Shoreline East into New Haven to see the Yale British Art Gallery. Showing AARP members, advocates, how valuable that service is. So we are happy to see increased funding for that. In the housing space, we didn't quite make it across the finish line with a bill that's been dubbed the Golden Girls bill. So that bill would have allowed individuals to rent out rooms in their house. So you think of the show, where you have a group of widows that are renting rooms from another widow and living together and having that companionship. We heard directly from legislators actually that had that experience, that after their spouse had died, they ended up having a friend move in and rent a room from them. But unfortunately, in Connecticut, the rules from town to town, city to city vary a lot. So some municipalities allow it, others don't, and it can be a confusing landscape for individuals. So we're going to continue to push to make sure that there's the ability for people to rent out rooms if they'd like. We know that that can really be a win-win. You can increase affordable housing options for individuals, but you also can see some other benefits in home sharing. If you have two people living together, they can provide companionship, especially like we, just talked about with widows. You also can see sometimes intergenerational home sharing, where an older person is living with a younger person. The older person gets companionship. The younger person can help with things like shoveling snow or mowing the lawn, in return for reduced rent. So we will continue pushing for that in the future and hope that we can, get that across the finish line.
Indeed. One thing you didn't mention that is important is there was an increase in a pilot that would allow for folks to get funds to adapt their home. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So many things I, almost almost forget about them. So that is an extension of a pilot, really taking the pilot from a pilot program to a statewide full-scale program that will allow grants to individual homemakers to make modifications to their home. So if you want to age in place, you own your home, but you need to make modifications like adding a ramp or grab bars in the bathroom, the types of things that can help make your home safe. This grant program will provide some funding to help you be able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We are going to talk to the Department of Aging and Disability Services about how that grant is going to roll out statewide and when, and we will be making sure people hear about it. So thank you for that. All right, John, last but not least on this one. only been like over a decade you've been working on this. So
Yeah.
we'll just make it last for this because it's the last time you're going to have to do it, I think.
Well,
Voter education, big part of our mission as an organization. In 2024 in Connecticut, voters said the legislature should amend the state constitution to allow for no excuse absentee balloting. Tell us about how that's going to roll out because it passed.
yeah. It's amazing. As I said to the other advocates and the proponents of this in the legislature, that finally we're in the 20th century in Connecticut when it comes to voting, because we were one of the most restrictive states when it comes to voting. But finally, while other states may be rolling back, we're making Connecticut more voter friendly. And as you said, over 58% of the voters in Connecticut approved the constitutional amendment that was intended to enable the state to get to no excuse absentee balloting. That is going to take place in Connecticut this year. Virtually the entire bill will be in effect for this year, and which will mean that you'll no longer need an excuse to be able to vote by absentee ballot. There'll no longer be a two envelope system. You'll be able to vote, and when you cast your vote, there'll be a system for you to be able to track it and know where it is in the process. Most people don't realize today that most people today don't realize that you needed an excuse to vote absentee ballot anyway. So a lot of people were breaking the law unknowingly. But most people didn't realize that if you actually made a mistake, like you didn't sign one of the envelopes, your ballot was rejected. And we didn't know that because we didn't start counting ballots till midday on election day. So there was you were out of luck and you never knew whether your vote was counted or not. Well, now we'll have a system to track all that, inform you if you made a mistake so you can come in and fix or cure your ballot. They'll start counting votes earlier in the day because there'll be more ability to kind of track the system and make sure there'll be a bigger volume. So we've really come a long way in Connecticut. We now have same-day voter registration. We have 2 weeks of early voting in person, and now we have no excuse absentee balloting. So we're on track to be very voter friendly, very accessible, and hopefully will increase turnout, because the more people participate in the process and in the system, the better we all are for it. So we're very encouraged by the fact that we were able to get this done. And by the way, there'll also be a list. You could say I permanently want to vote by mail, so that you can be on the list to always be sent a ballot and application so that you can vote in elections. So a lot of good things happened in this bill. We're very happy. And as you said, it's been over 10 years. It's the will of the voters. We're glad that the legislature heeded their voices, and that we'll have this, and we'll have it this year when we're in a very important statewide election for governor, constitutional offices. The entire state legislature and all 5 congressional districts will be on the ballot. And AARP will be very active when it comes to encouraging people to know about the ways in which they can vote, those new and old, as well as the issues that they should be talking to state and federal candidates about when it comes to things that are important to those 50 plus, particularly at the federal level when it comes to Social Security and support for family caregivers, and building off of the great work that Natalie and others had done with the caregiver tax credit and others. So it's going to be an important year. People should stay tuned and participate in the process.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a lot of education to do. So now that the legislative session has ended, we will shift our focus over to voter education. Just take a deep breath. We'll start that soon. Okay, so great job to both of you. Thank you to all the advocacy groups that worked alongside of us. Thank you to the General Assembly for all the amazing bipartisan, bicameral support we had on a lot of our issues. And the volunteers and the e-advocates that help us too. So you guys out there who take action when we email you and contact your legislators, they notice. So thank you to them. Awesome volunteers. Get some time off between voter education. That kicks off, and we will be back at it again for next year with anything we didn't get over the hump this year. So thank you again. Remember, you can easily join us as an e-advocate and help us with those important policies. Scan the QR code below, and John, Natalie, get some sleep.